Have you ever imagined an old rusted propane tank could keep a house alive after the electrical grid failed? 3 weeks without power is enough to push anyone to the edge, but sometimes the answer is sitting abandoned in the backyard, ignored for years. Everything started after brutal weather rolled through the neighborhood. The wind screamed outside while phone batteries drained lower and lower. One power line after another snapped in the storm. Soon the entire area disappeared into darkness. At first, it felt like a simple inconvenience. The opening hours of a blackout usually do. But by the third day, reality changes fast. Cold cans of beans stop feeling like a temporary problem. Every forgotten preparation suddenly becomes a regret. Most people in that situation simply wait for the electricity to come back. But sitting behind the shed was something different. An old propane tank, rusted, empty, long past certification. Ugly enough that nobody wanted to look at it twice. For months, the plan had been to haul it away to a recycling center. Then necessity changed everything. The thought appeared almost immediately. How many people throw away things that still have value? Could that discarded tank become some kind of emergency energy source? The strange part is that expired propane containers are still incredibly durable. They were designed to survive enormous pressure. Most people overlook them completely, even though they are among the toughest containers sitting around ordinary homes. But before touching anything, safety came first. There was no chance of cutting into a tank without making absolutely certain it was empty. The valve was loosened slowly in open air with plenty of ventilation until nothing remained inside. No matter what the tank would become later, the first priority was making sure there would be no surprise propane left behind. Then came the unexpected idea. The tank was not turned into fuel storage. Instead, it became the center of a tiny biogas digester. Simple backyard biogas systems had always sounded like something meant for farms, not ordinary homes. But with enough patience and a little creativity, a small setup could actually work. Building it was not especially complicated, though the smell of decomposing food waste was another story entirely. The inside of the tank was cleaned as thoroughly as possible. After that, an opening was cut near the upper section, just large enough to install a connector. Anyone without welding equipment could still make the system work using strong fittings and careful seals. The important thing was preventing leaks. Surprises were unacceptable there too. Next came the fuel source. Most households throw away enormous amounts of organic waste every week without thinking about it. Coffee grounds, potato skins, old bread, grass clippings from the yard. Layer by layer, those scraps went into the tank with water before the container was sealed shut. Inside, bacteria immediately began feeding on the material. In only a short time, the process started producing methane gas naturally. That mattered because the propane tank had originally been designed to contain exactly that kind of pressure safely. Soon, the trapped gas was connected to a small camping stove. Before long, the flame returned. After 4 days of eating cold canned food, a hot meal changed everything. The effect on morale was immediate. But the real question still remained unanswered. How long could this homemade system actually keep the house running during a prolonged blackout? Once the little biogas setup built from the propane tank finally started working properly, something changed. There's a strange feeling that comes from turning on a stove burner during a blackout and realizing the flame exists because of your own work. It was never only about cooking food. It was about knowing that a pile of discarded material could become something useful again. That old propane tank ended up proving more durable and practical than many expensive solutions people normally depend on. A lot of people misunderstand what power really means. Electricity is not simply about comfort or convenience. At its core, it is the ability to continue doing what must be done when everything else stops working. The homemade digester did not magically power the refrigerator or restore the entire house, but it revealed something important. People can survive with far less than they imagine. Every morning started almost the same way. As soon as daylight arrived, scraps from the kitchen were gathered together. Brown lettuce, coffee grounds, leftover food waste. Everything went back into the tank with another small amount of water. By evening, there was usually enough gas to boil water or cook eggs. On good days, enough fuel remained for another meal later. Nothing about it felt luxurious, but hunger never became a problem. More importantly, there was a sense of control returning little by little. That alone made every unpleasant smell and every awkward section of PVC pipe worthwhile. The experience also taught an important lesson. Real power does not always come from brute force. Sometimes it comes from learning how to stretch resources farther than expected. 3 weeks without electricity changes the way people think. Every decision becomes a trade. Should the gas be used all at once to cook a large meal now, or saved across 2 days for smaller meals later? Living that way teaches economic reality faster than any classroom ever could. Every resource matters. Every piece of waste has potential value if viewed differently. Another thing became impossible to ignore. Modern households throw away unbelievable amounts of usable material. Garbage continued feeding the system because garbage itself became the fuel source. With the right design, waste turned into something capable of carrying a person through a blackout. Most people see leftovers as the end of a process. But in a survival economy, the cycle keeps going. A circular system does not require some giant government facility. Sometimes all it takes is a damaged propane tank and the willingness to improvise. Of course, problems appeared along the way. After several days, gas production started slowing down. Adjustments had to be made. Different feed mixtures worked better than others. More water helped sometimes. Other times the bacteria simply needed time to recover and catch up. Depending on daily gas production felt almost like maintaining a garden. Too much waste created problems. Too little waste reduced fuel output. The learning process was real. But after roughly a week of constant adjustments, the system finally became more predictable. It felt similar to budgeting money during hard times. Constant changes, constant planning, constant preparation for the next problem before it arrived. What came as the biggest surprise was not the fuel itself. It was the effect on the household. People started gathering together in the kitchen more often. Without phones and distractions, conversations returned naturally. Stories were shared while preparing scraps for the digester. Losing electricity somehow forced everyone to reconnect again. That became one of the most unexpected parts of rebuilding life around old-fashioned basics. The stove burner became more than a cooking tool. It became a reminder that people can adapt. Neighbors walked past the rusty propane tank without understanding what it had become. To them, it still looked like junk waiting to be hauled away. But hidden inside that rusted shell was proof that resourcefulness matters. Sometimes, survival means becoming a little scrappy. Sometimes the answer is hiding inside objects already written off as useless. Then another challenge arrived. By the beginning of the third week without electricity, the entire experiment with the old propane tank had evolved into something much larger than simply keeping a burner lit. At first, everything had been about surviving the blackout and holding onto a sense of normal life. Now it was becoming something else entirely. As the days passed, something unexpected started happening. It was no longer only one person depending on the homemade biogas system. Curiosity spread through the house. The children kept asking questions about the bubbles inside the tank and how the setup actually worked. Even the wife, who had always looked at the strange backyard projects with doubt, slowly changed her mind once she realized the system was genuinely producing fuel. Every potato peel, every scoop of leftover spaghetti, every scrap added into the tank continued helping create pressure. It was old-fashioned energy science working right in the backyard. Before long, the routine itself became comforting. Each night, while the rest of the neighborhood stayed dark and silent, the kitchen turned into the warm center of the house. Not because there was abundance, but because there was enough. Soup simmered on the burner, bread baked during colder evenings. All of it came from a rusted propane tank most people would have thrown away without a second thought. At the same time, the system revealed its limits. That lesson became just as important as the success itself. Under normal circumstances, people rarely think about electricity. Phones get charged automatically. Microwaves run without effort. Power feels endless until it disappears. But relying on a homemade energy source changes everything. Every choice matters. Every use of fuel becomes deliberate. It teaches people how to stretch resources as far as possible instead of wasting them casually. There was a strange satisfaction in living that way. The experience transformed abstract economic ideas into something physical and immediate. Scarcity, trade-offs, opportunity cost. Those concepts stop feeling theoretical once daily life depends on them. A few experiments followed during the blackout. One attempt involved using the gas to warm a bed. Technically it worked, but fuel disappeared too quickly to make it worthwhile. Direct cooking turned out to be the smarter use of the methane. Another experiment used the leftover residue from the digester and the garden beds. What remained, after the bacteria finished processing the waste, became surprisingly effective compost. In the end, the system did more than provide food. It returned nutrients back into the yard as well. The most surprising detail was the total cost. Including tools and replacement parts, the entire project cost around $50. A large generator or expensive battery system would have required gasoline and constant trips for fuel. The homemade biogas tank, despite its awkward pipes and clunky valves, kept operating day after day without a single visit to the gas station. When electricity finally returned after the blackout, there was obvious relief throughout the house, but there was also pride. The experience proved it was possible not only to survive difficult conditions, but to squeeze real value from things usually ignored or discarded. That battered propane tank had quietly become the center of an entire household economy during the outage. Even after the power returned, the experiments continued. Small tests, tiny adjustments, new ideas. Eventually it became clear this was never only an emergency trick. It represented a completely different way of thinking about resources. Real security does not always require expensive equipment or complicated systems. Sometimes usable power is already sitting in the backyard disguised as junk. All it really takes is a different perspective and the willingness to get dirty working with what already exists. So now the question becomes simple. What is sitting around your own property right now that could serve a greater purpose than anyone realizes? Maybe the next overlooked object is already waiting quietly for someone willing to see its hidden value. When everything else fails, the solution is sometimes closer than anyone expects. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.